Yeah, I don't. What do you feel about the reality of where the transfer portal is in the sport? I'm not asking you if it's like, is it good or bad, and be like an absolutist about it, but this is a reality that we are talking about: football, coaching changes, recruiting, and the portal as ways. And, I talked to Brandon Huffman a little bit about it, how there are like portal specific coordinators just monitoring who's good in the sport, who's entered into the portal, whatever. I guess a tampering coordinator, if you're going to believe certain methods.
See, that's a job, not the tampering coordinator.
No, I know.
But the portal coordinator, that's a job you and I could do. Don't you think? I feel like we'd be good at that.
We would need to meet many more high school coaches to be like, what if this guy entered the portal? Could you? Yeah, we'd have to figure that side of things out.
Let me make the Google sheet for the portal coordinator. Right. Let me do that. That I could do. I would enjoy that.
That's totally good. You can do that. But it is a reality, right? That like this is how roster construction works now in 2022 and moving forward. So my question to you is, do you like it? Not do you think it should exist? Because we're too far into that, right? The immediate eligibility, the movement of quarterbacks when it doesn't work out, when they don't get the job or any position, right? Whether they're disappointed or they're homesick or their girlfriend goes somewhere else. Like there are a number of reasons why guys enter into a portal. But is it something that you are finding yourself interested in and or good for the sport, whether or not, it's going anywhere?
Well, good for the sport goes out the window. Right. Yeah. Good for the sport. We could talk for another hour and a half as to what's good for the sport and what isn't.
Yeah.
I am very fascinated by it. I am completely fascinated by it because it is in effect college football free agency.
Sure.
It's free agency.
Yeah.
And whether or not you're of the Dabo mindset that there are adult men who are manipulating and tampering with the process and lying to student athletes, that you can certainly have that mindset if you want to, but it's hard for me to take a completely unbiased view of what the portal does for us, because all too often we come to this point in the season or even into January or at some point in the lows of the off season, and we don't have anything to talk about. And what I see happening is college football very much going the way of the NFL, where we find ways on the margins here to extend the talking points, whether it's through the portal, whether it's through NIL, whether it's through conference realignment, whether it's through coaching movement, whether it's through potential playoff expansion, all of these things that exist on the periphery of the sport that have growing influence. There's media rights. There are all these things that kind of add depth to the discussion year round, that this is very clearly turning into a year round sport, much the way the NFL has gone over the last decade plus. And so at least from that standpoint, as somebody who considers himself a super fan, I'm no expert, but I am okay with it because it gives us more to talk about on the college football side. It also changes dynamics a fair amount. It does upset the balance of the sport, at least as we come to know it over the last, 30 years. Guys can up and leave if they're unhappy with a coach leaving, a playing situation, a new scheme, what have you. Just isn't working out. Maybe they're homesick, as you said before. So that ability for a player to take control of his future, his destiny in college football, that is a new dynamic. And I love new dynamics because I think it forces the Alabamas and the Clemsons and the power brokers in the sport to rejigger their mindset. So I'm okay with it. I think it makes things interesting. I am fascinated by the portal this year more than ever because we've seen so much high-profile movement. Is it good for the sport long-term? I don't know. Long-term, we can talk about that in May. But for now, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see so many big names on the move. Spencer Rattler to South Carolina. Come on. How is that not an interesting story?
That's an interesting story. There are a certain amount of quarterback or whatever position movement. If they're filling in a gap or if they're giving a team that isn't traditionally able to recruit and sign top-level players, right, that it spreads the talent around, which is probably a good thing for the sport. But Justin Fields to Ohio State. Jamison Williams and Henry To'oTo'o to Alabama, right? Like, there are also, like, we didn't know it at the time, but Joe Burrow to LSU. It was amazing. It was amazing for Joe Burrow. It was amazing for LSU. It was amazing for a college football viewer like myself and yourself and everybody listening to this show. It's great. But I am of the mindset, like, two things can be true at once. Like, fair is fair. Coaches can move freely. Players should be able to move freely. I totally get that. I think we have entered into a phase where if you are anything but fully supportive of every single right a player could or should have, then you're looked at as being like, you're for the institutions, whatever. I think it's kind of a bummer. I think all of this player movement is great for the players, and it's kind of a bummer for fans because college football is already an impossible sport to follow, right? Like, between recruiting, between weird bowl games, between how the playoff gets decided, like, it would be kind of impossible if we just met somebody, if we were at a restaurant and we met somebody from Osaka and they're like, oh, college football, what's that all about? Like, it would be impossible to explain to them the details. Now, certain things are true in other sports where it'd be like, how do you explain a cap hit or dead money to somebody who wants to be an NFL fan? Or, like, you can buy a player in soccer, but you got to return him. Like, there are things in every sport where it's just like, yeah, it's a solid verbal, but he hasn't signed. Like, okay, what?
Right.
It makes college football more difficult to follow because these guys are only going to be, the top guys are there for 3 years, maybe 4 years. And so when you have players moving around, like, it's harder to keep track of names. And I know that was the complaint with the one and done stuff with college basketball, but for the health of the sport, it's good to root for the same players on the same teams for multiple years. And so it is a bummer that Jahmyr Gibbs couldn't make it work in Georgia Tech and be like that flashy, amazing running back that led Georgia Tech to bowl eligibility and 8-9 wins, whatever. And I get why he's leaving because he should play on the biggest stage possible given his talents and ceiling. But yeah, it's still a little bit sad to me. It's still a little bit sad to me that, like, the whole sport gets thrown into a Christmas globe, whatever, the snow globe every December between the coaches, between the players. And it's just like, it's very difficult unless you do this for a living or you are on, like, the college football subreddit all day, every day to keep track of the sport. It makes it a more difficult experience.
It makes it harder. And that's not great. With a ton of turnover and new names coming into the sport every year. I think, just broadly speaking, I think the real downside to all this movement is that at the end of the day, you've got 18 to 22-year-old kids making these big decisions about where they want to go and play.
Totally.
And, you can use NFL free agency as a guide. Not all those guys work out. At least they get paid.
Yeah.
But even in that case where you've got agents and people working on your behalf, there's no guarantees that it's going to work out.
Right.
And you may want to be a skeptic and say that kids are chasing NIL money. In some cases, that may be what's going on. In most cases, that won't be the case. In most cases, they're looking for playing time. And when you chase playing time, oftentimes things happen. You get hurt. Other guys step up. There's always a better recruit that steps.
It's just always a gamble. It's always going to be a gamble.
It feels like the transfer portal. If we're going to draw the rough comparison between the NFL and free agency and what we've got going on now in college football, it just seems to me like transferring to a faraway place, or maybe you've got some familiarity, but there's no safety net whatsoever. There's just a huge risk there. There's much greater risk to you as a 19-year-old or 20-year-old quarterback from Ohio State than if you're a pro, you're at least getting compensated to go elsewhere.
Yeah. No, I'm totally with you. And it's a gamble, and hopefully, fingers crossed, every one of these kids entering the portal is getting sound advice and using as many people in their lives as a sounding board as humanly possible, right? Because you're going to get good advice, you're going to get bad advice. And for their sake, I hope there is a lot of, radical transparency, radical honesty, right? That they're like, look, you're a good player. It's hard for me to see you as a starting SEC quarterback. Perhaps don't waste your time with that. There are certain things that people need to hear. And, of course, a guy is going to bet on himself, right? They told me I couldn't do it, and look where I am now.
Sure.
That's cool too. But at least hear those voices. At least get those voices. And if everybody's telling you the same thing, be like, okay, I want to start. I'm going to James Madison, and I'm going to thrive there. I'm going to go to Jacksonville State. I'm going to go wherever. I'm going to go to Northern Illinois. But it's life, man. Life is risk. Life is a gamble. And so I guess you hope that all these players put themselves in the best possible position to get fortunate. But otherwise, I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of disappointed people as this moves forward.
All these guys that we discussed today won't hit.
Yeah.
They won't hit.
No.
They won't hit. For every Russell Wilson, there's, any number of guys who go into the portal and it just doesn't work out. They don't take immediately. So it will be interesting to see. There are some big names that are still out there. We'll do our best to cover it here, but it is growing. It is growing.
Yeah.